Case study, Mrs. Jones. So this is a single client with modest assets. How can the asset allocation trust benefit her? Mrs. Jones is a widow. Her house is currently paid off and valued at $280,000, and she's got savings of $40,000. Mrs. Jones is fit and healthy. Mrs. Jones lost her husband 4 years ago. They had 2 children together. Both are now in their 40s. After the initial conversation, her wish was to make sure her estate goes to her 2 children. On further discussion, her son is not happily married and she hasn't spoken to her daughter for 5 years. So why would the asset allocation trust work for Mrs. Jones? Well, it would avoid contentious probate. She may not want her daughter to receive an equal share of the estate, and by placing her major asset into the trust, she can avoid a contentious probate scenario, as the daughter will not be able to contest the assets in the trust, providing Mrs. Jones survives 6 years. It can protect inheritance from spouses. She is able to protect her son's inheritance in the event he does not wish to receive his inheritance when she dies due to possible issues with his wife. What grant of probate? Using the asset allocation trust, Mrs. Jones is also removing the need for a grant of probate to be obtained for the assets in trust. Protecting assets from herself. She may meet someone and end up disinheriting her own children without realizing. Care home fees. If she goes into care, there's strong evidence to show that she was not attempting to avoid a creditor, so her house cannot be forcibly used to pay for her care, but her chosen trustees can use the asset to pay for her care and or control access to her funds to avoid fraud or other influences. Mrs. Jones doesn't have a partner with whom she can sever the tenancy to protect her share of the house, so a lifetime trust is the recommended way of protecting her assets. But what about the extras? While none of the extras are needed at the time she sets the trust up, they're not detracting from the trust for her. What if she comes into inheritance? The extra provisions would mean she doesn't have to undo her previous planning, which takes into account potential changes. Case study 2, the Smiths. This is a married couple with a high net worth. How can the asset allocation trust benefit them? Mr. and Mrs. are both happily married and have 2 children together, both now in their late 20s. Their house is currently valued at $780,000 and they've got savings of $340,000. Mr. and Mrs. Smith have been married for 35 years, both have been married before. They have 2 children together, both are now in their late 20s, and 1 child from previous marriages, each in their late 30s. So after conversation, they aren't bothered about care fees, but they want to ensure the children are all treated fairly. They have both had wills previously and understand the benefits of using will trusts to protect against sideways disinheritance. So why would the AAT work for the Smiths? Well, protection from sideways disinheritance. Using will trusts can protect the assets of the first to die. However, using an AAT enables them both to protect their assets, no matter if they die first or second. If the survivor remarries, they may not want the new spouse to receive all of the assets when they die. Using the AAT ensures the children will inherit. Protecting inheritance from spouses. Having both gone through a divorce, they find the ability to protect their own children's inheritance at the time of their death very important. By using an AAT, the children will have choices available. What grant of probate? Using the asset allocation trust, the Smiths are also removing the need for a grant of probate to be obtained for assets in trust. This can save both time and possible expenses for their family. Protecting assets from themselves. They like the idea of the assets being held in a trust, so liquidating is something that takes thought, preventing rash decisions later in life. So what's the tax position? So their total estate is valued at $1,120,000. They are transferring the house, valued at $780,000, into the asset allocation trust. So therefore $325,000, which is the nil rate band, is a chargeable lifetime transfer. Each is transferring an additional $65,000 of the value of the property onto bare trust for themselves. This portion of the assets in trust will pass under their wills, so it would be important to make sure that they have a property trust in their will. The trusts are valued each year, and any value over the nil rate band is counted as being held on bare trust. They nominate each of the 4 children to receive 25% each of the resident's nil rate band carve-out. So on death, using current figures, each of the 4 children would automatically receive enough value in the house to ensure the full resident's nil rate band is allowed. The balance is then allocated to the nil rate band fund up to a maximum of $325,000 currently, and then anything over that is counted as being held on bare trust and passes under their wills. The nil rate band fund is discretionary, so could be given to grandchildren instead of children if the children wish. Case Study 3, the Robinsons. This is a married couple with modest assets. How can the asset allocation trust benefit them? Their house is currently valued at $380,000 and they have savings of $60,000. Mr. and Mrs. Robinson have been married for 30 years. Neither's been married before. They have 3 children together. All are now in the late 20s. They're both fit and healthy. After conversation, Mrs. Robinson's sister died 3 years after having had a severe stroke. She worries what would happen if one of them was to die early and wants the best planning in place just in case. So why would the AAT work for the Robinsons? Well, again, we have protection against sideways disinheritance. The assets would be protected on first and second death. It gives the potential to protect inheritance from spouses so that their own children have the option of what to do with the assets when they die. No grant of probate is required again, and again protects assets. They're protecting the assets and giving options to the survivor should something unforeseen happen to one of them at an early age.